A hard-working immigrant nurse who spent her life serving others ends up murdered in her own home by the very son she raised with unconditional love. No witnesses, no screams, only cold data and a missing dog that vanished like a ghost. What drives a son to kill his mother, and why does the entire town of Grover Beach still live under the shadow of this crime? Join us as we unravel the untold details of the Athena Valentini case, a shattered American dream buried in a family tragedy. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button to uncover more shocking true crime stories and receive exclusive updates and rewards from our channel. Grover Beach, a quiet coastal town in California where the golden sun stretches over old rooftops and the empty streets seem untouched by tragedy. Tucked away in a modest home sat Athena Valentini, a 64-year-old Hungarian-born nurse who had spent her life serving in the state prison system. She lived alone, disciplined, reserved, and orderly like a quiet shadow in the margins of American life. That morning, the sun rose slower than usual. On the front porch, Athena's Beagle, her loyal watchdog, was nowhere to be seen. The dog, usually lounging by the steps and barking at strangers, had vanished. It might not have seemed important to passers-by, but for those who knew Athena, it was a red flag. That dog wasn't just a pet, it was a ritual, a constant in her predictable world. The house stood still, curtains drawn tight. Silence clung to the neighborhood like a fog. No footsteps, no movement, and above all, no cheery morning greeting from Athena. The neighbors felt a quiet unease creeping in, though not strong enough to warrant a call to police. They simply stared at the still gate, wondering if something had quietly shifted behind that wooden door. Inside the house, something was wrong. That wrongness, though invisible, seemed to spill into the air, chilling the street with a subtle dread. No one could explain it, but the tragedy had already begun, whispered through the smallest details: a missing dog, the absence of morning coffee, and the haunting stillness of a woman who had always lived her life with precision and punctuality. Something had happened to Athena Valentini. But at that moment, no one realized the silence was the first and only warning. On the morning of October 25, 2018, at exactly 11:47 a.m., the clock marking the start of Athena Valentini's nursing shift at the California Men's Colony ticked past without her. For a woman who hadn't missed a single day in over 30 years, her absence wasn't just unusual, it was alarming. At the prison, 2 correctional officers quickly sensed something was wrong. They didn't call to report a disappearance, no. It was subtler than that. They requested a welfare check, a term that often conceals growing dread. No one yet suspected that this call would be the first step into tragedy. A patrol car pulled into the narrow street where Athena lived. Everything appeared disarmingly normal. There was no barking from her Beagle. No one came to the door. The house stood still, neat, quiet, and undisturbed. But that stillness made the air feel thick with something unspoken. The officer approached the front gate. Normally it was secured with a metal padlock, a routine Athena followed without fail. That morning the gate was ajar. The padlock was gone, as if someone had intentionally left a breach, an opening between the outside world and the unsettling silence within. The front door wasn't locked. A gentle push was enough to make it swing inward. The officer didn't enter, not yet. He stared into the dim interior, half-lit, half-shadowed. No broken glass, no signs of forced entry, no scattered belongings, just a cream-colored curtain, and on it a faint streak of dried red. Not much, not messy, but blood, and that alone was enough. The officer stepped back and called for backup. His voice over the radio was steady, but his eyes had already narrowed. The mind of a seasoned cop was racing, stringing together small details into something larger. At that point, no one knew where Athena was, but every instinct screamed that something had gone terribly wrong. This was a woman of order, a nurse in a correctional facility, a person who understood safety. People like her don't vanish quietly, and blood, even a trace, is never benign. They couldn't enter without a warrant. But the unlocked door, the neighbor's testimony, and that ominous red smear were enough to justify what came next. A decision was made. The silence inside that home was about to be shattered. It all started there with a missed shift, a routine welfare check, and a curtain stained with blood. But hidden behind those fragments was something far more sinister, a carefully buried nightmare waiting to be uncovered in the harsh light of justice. The door creaked open, and for the first time in nearly 2 days, light slipped into Athena Valentini's apartment. The officer stepped inside with deliberate caution, hand hovering over his holstered weapon. There was no sound, only the quiet scuff of his boots against worn wooden floors. But it was the silence that screamed the loudest. The air was thick, almost unmoving. A sharp metallic scent clung to the walls. Part blood, part something far worse. Something unmistakably tied to death. This wasn't just the absence of life. It was the lingering imprint of something violent. Each step forward was a descent into dread. The apartment was almost too neat, eerily untouched. No overturned furniture, no shattered glass, no signs of a struggle, only the heavy breathing of officers trying to remain composed. Then inside the bedroom, the unthinkable came into view. Athena Valentini, a Hungarian-born nurse who had dedicated her life to caregiving, was lying face down on the floor. Her neck bore several deep, clean lacerations. Blood had spread across the hard wood, pooling beneath the bed and seeping into an old rug. The wounds weren't random, they were intentional, precise cold. There were no screams, no obvious resistance. That left one chilling conclusion: the killer had struck swiftly, unexpectedly, and with a practiced hand. Perhaps he had been right behind her. One moment of peace, then silence forever. Scattered beside her were pill blister packs. Some crushed, others still intact. Nothing in the room suggested chaos, nothing was ransacked. It was as if the intruder came not to rob, but to end. Police sealed off the apartment. No words were exchanged. There was nothing to say. They were standing at the center of something calculated, something deeply personal. Whoever had done this had likely known Athena, known her routine, known her trust, known how to get close without raising alarms. Even the dog, her beloved Beagle, hadn't barked. It was as if he, too, had trusted the killer. This wasn't a random act. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't rage spilling over. It was precise. It was deliberate. And it had been executed by someone who had spent time thinking it through. Now the officers were left with only the smell of death, the quiet drip of blood, and a chilling question hanging in the air. Who would do this to Athena Valentini, and why? After securing the crime scene and removing Athena Valentini's body for autopsy, investigators began combing through every possible clue to unravel the mystery behind her death. In a small town like Grover Beach, not much escapes the eye of security cameras, especially those mounted on front porches, driveways, or nearby storefronts, so they started with the most telling source: Athena's everyday life. Footage revealed that Athena lived by routine. Each morning, she walked her Beagle around the neighborhood, a gentle, loyal dog with a cautious temperament. She would pause to chat briefly with neighbors, nod at the mailman, and then return to her small apartment to prepare for work. No strange visitors, no raised voices. A life so quiet, it almost disappeared into the background. But the footage from the night of October 24th, the night she died, offered the first unsettling clue. At around 6:30 p.m., a camera across the street captured a figure in dark clothing near Athena's apartment. His face was obscured. His steps were steady. He walked calmly, phone in hand, and then came the moment that made officers freeze the frame and rewind it again and again. Following just a few steps behind him was Athena's Beagle. No leash, no tugging, no resistance. The dog walked freely, tail wagging. Its small paws trotted alongside the man, as if they had done it many times before. That changed everything. A stranger doesn't get that kind of trust from a dog like Athena's. This Beagle was known to be wary of new faces, loyal only to a small circle. There was simply no way it would follow someone. it didn't recognize. The implication was clear. The killer wasn't just familiar. He was trusted. Investigators widened the scope. Relatives, friends, co-workers, even distant acquaintances from years past. But now every question revolved around one shadowy figure in dark clothing and one trusting dog. This wasn't just about security footage. It was about instinct. That dog's silent response spoke louder than any testimony. It was the signal, the unspoken truth, that Athena's life hadn't been taken by a stranger, but by someone from within her world. Someone close enough to earn the trust of both the woman and the dog that never left her side. Inside Athena Valentini's apartment, police found several charging devices plugged in phone chargers, backup batteries, even medical equipment chargers. But one thing was missing: her primary cell phone. For someone who lived alone and kept regular contact with her son and friends, a missing phone wasn't just odd, it was critical. That absence alone shifted the direction of the entire investigation. Detectives submitted an urgent request to Athena's mobile carrier. Within hours, they received detailed call records, and a strange pattern began to emerge. A particular number bearing the 513 area code from Ohio had contacted Athena repeatedly on October 24th, the very day of her death. It wasn't one of her regular contacts. It was new, unfamiliar, and far too active to ignore. From cell tower, data investigators began to reconstruct Athena's final movements. Another detail leapt off the page at 3:26 p.m. That afternoon, Athena was recorded making a stop at a local UPS store. Detectives reached out to the store and requested surveillance footage. The footage revealed nothing out of the ordinary. Athena stood at the counter smiling and chatting with the clerk. She wore a light jacket and held a small package. There were no signs of stress, no indications she was being followed. Their conversation lasted 4 minutes, casual, calm, and full of ease, but within hours, she would be found lying face down in a pool of her own blood. More importantly, the cameras captured Athena stepping outside and raising a phone to her ear. The timestamp matched exactly with one of the calls from that strange Ohio number. That was no coincidence. That was a countdown. The question now became, who owned the number? Why were they calling Athena so persistently in the hours before her death? And why did the last known call from that number end minutes before a dark-clothed figure was seen approaching her home? The investigation shifted to tracking the origin of the phone number. It wasn't tied to any contract. It wasn't in any name. Every clue pointed to a burner phone, an unregistered prepaid device often used to avoid detection, and it had been activated on October 22nd, just 2 days before Athena's murder. Now a profile of the suspect began to form, not by face, but by behavior. This wasn't random. This person had a plan. They knew Athena. They called her repeatedly with intent. They were circling her life, hidden behind calls and signals, waiting for the moment to strike. In those final frames of video, Athena appeared calm and kind, completely unaware she was speaking to someone who may have been stalking her steps. But digital footprints don't lie. And as investigators followed the faint trail of data, they inched closer to a chilling realization: the person they were looking for might be someone very close to the victim. The mysterious burner phone with the Ohio area code led investigators to a crucial breakthrough. Though unregistered, every device leaves a trail, and this one began at a Best Buy store in Bloomington, Indiana. More precisely, just a few blocks from the home of Levente Lazar, the only son of Athena Valentini. The discovery hit investigators like a punch to the gut. No one wanted to believe that a son could be connected to his mother's murder, but detective work relies on facts, not feelings. Surveillance footage from Best Buy on October 22nd revealed exactly what they feared: a young man tall, wearing a gray jacket and a baseball cap, Levente Lazar himself seen at the checkout counter purchasing a prepaid phone and a data card. From that moment, what was once speculation began to take shape. Investigators shifted focus to tracking the movement of both the burner phone and Levente's white Jeep GPS data and cell tower pings. painted a clear, chilling picture, a journey across state lines from Indiana all the way to California, precisely during the time Athena was killed. The phone was activated in Bloomington, then immediately powered off an early red flag for intentional concealment. But 2 days later, it came back online in Oklahoma, then in Texas. Then on October 24th, the day of Athena's death, it connected to a cell tower in Grover Beach. Everything aligned too perfectly. Meanwhile, Valentini's Jeep was caught on multiple traffic cameras at a toll booth in Oklahoma, a gas station in Texas, and on a stretch of Arizona highway just before dusk. Each sighting brought him closer to the scene of the crime. What sent chills down the spines of investigators was the timeline. The phone activity and the car's movement placed Valentini in Grover Beach on the exact night his mother was murdered. And then, radio silence. Between 6 p.m. and midnight, the burner phone went dark. Athena's estimated time of death fell directly within that gap. At this point, there were no more doubts. Investigators no longer saw just a son in a family photo. They saw a man actively concealing his movements, one who bought an untraceable phone, one who crossed thousands of miles without telling anyone, and one who vanished from digital sight during the hours his mother was killed. The burner phone, once intended to be anonymous, had become the key to unlocking the truth, and behind that truth stood Valentini Lazar, the man Athena had once trusted the most. Late afternoon in Bloomington, Indiana, a peaceful college town nearly 400 miles from Grover Beach, the doorbell of a modest apartment rang. When Valentini Lazar opened the door, he had no idea his world was about to collapse. 2 officers stood on the porch, their expressions solemn, their voices calm but heavy with meaning. "Valentini, we need to talk to you about your mother, Athena Valentini." He froze for a moment, then barely whispered, "What happened to my mother?" When informed that she had died under circumstances suspected to be homicide, he collapsed into a chair, face buried in his hands, visibly shaken. His initial reaction seemed genuine, like a grieving son in shock, but the detectives had long since learned that emotion could be rehearsed. Data, on the other hand, never lies. Valentini denied any involvement. He claimed he hadn't left Indiana at all during the month of October. He said his last conversation with his mother was days earlier by phone. When asked about the burner phone, he shook his head and insisted he owned only one device. But layer by layer, the technological evidence was closing in around him like a noose. One of the investigators opened a laptop and began presenting the data one piece at a time. First, surveillance footage showing Valentini purchasing a burner phone at Best Buy in Bloomington. Second, GPS data from that same burner phone tracking a route from Indiana through Oklahoma and Texas to California right on the day of Athena's murder. Third, cell tower connections confirmed the phone pinged in Grover Beach on the afternoon of October 24th. Fourth, license plate readers logged Valentini's white Jeep crossing multiple states in a route that mirrored the phone's travel. And then came the final blow. A home surveillance camera outside Athena's residence captured a man with the same build and gait as Valentini, walking away from her apartment with Athena's Beagle following close behind. There was no clear shot of his face, but the height, posture, and timeline left little room for doubt. Valentini tried to keep calm, repeating, "It's not me. I didn't leave Bloomington. Someone must be impersonating me." But his voice began to shake, his fingers tapping nervously against the table, eyes darting toward the screen. The investigators didn't yell or pressure him. They just laid out the evidence frame by frame, timestamp by timestamp details. He couldn't explain away. The gaps in his story widened with every minute, inconsistencies in where he claimed to be, what phone he claimed to have, and what he insisted he didn't know. The room fell silent. Outside, fall leaves rustled softly in the wind, but inside, a storm was brewing in the mind of a suspect, slowly being stripped of every lie. And by that moment, without a single formal accusation, Valentini Lazar was already drowning in the digital trail he thought no one would ever follow. Inside the interrogation room, the atmosphere had shifted. Gone were the soft, courteous questions. It was time to lay down one of the strongest cards. A detective turned a laptop toward Levente. On the screen played surveillance footage from a Best Buy store in Bloomington. The clip was short, just over a minute, but it was enough to drain the color from Levente's face. The footage showed him in a jacket and cap standing at the checkout counter purchasing a white prepaid burner phone and a data card. The timestamp, the afternoon of October 22nd, just 2 days before Athena was killed. Levente said nothing. No longer did he deny buying the phone. When asked why he purchased it, he gave a vague answer. Personal reasons. No clarity, no real explanation. But that was just the beginning. Next came a different video, this time from a security camera near Athena's apartment. In the grainy footage at around 9:00 p.m. on October 24th, a tall man in a dark coat could be seen walking along the sidewalk. Just behind him was a Beagle no-leash, walking close at his heels, tail gently swaying, completely at ease. The location was just a 5-minute walk from Athena's home, and the time aligned perfectly with the medical examiner's estimate of her time of death, sometime between 8:30 and 9:15 p.m. Levente swallowed hard. He looked at the screen, then looked away. His voice, once steady, began to falter. He claimed he had traveled to California to purchase medical marijuana, but when asked where he bought it, from whom, and at what time, he had no answers. When asked why he would drive over 2,000 miles to get a product that was legally available near home, he replied, "I wanted to surprise my mom." It sounded plausible until it didn't. If he truly wanted to visit her, why not call ahead? Why use an unregistered phone? The detectives pushed further. They presented more footage. Traffic cameras showing Levente's white Jeep at a gas station in Arizona. Another clip showed the vehicle entering Grover Beach on the afternoon of October 24th, just hours before Athena's death. Under the weight of mounting evidence, Levente's story began to change. He now said he dropped by his mother's house but left when she wasn't there. He insisted he never entered. But the surveillance camera told a different story. It caught him walking away from the apartment right after the estimated time of death with Athena's Beagle, the dog that should have been inside. With every question, Levente grew more flustered. What he had once described as a spontaneous road trip now resembled a carefully calculated plan. From the moment he bought the burner phone to each documented highway stop, the pieces were falling into place, forming the outline of something deliberate. And now all investigators had to do was connect them. Levente Lazar sat back in his chair, his voice steady, his eyes unfocused, like someone clinging to a narrative carefully crafted in advance. He claimed his trip to California was simply to purchase medical marijuana, just $120 worth, a minor expense, shockingly small, when compared to the more than 2,000-mile journey he had taken across 3 states over 3 days. The detectives didn't interrupt. They let him speak. Then Levente added, "I also wanted to surprise my mom. Just drop in. But I didn't see her, so I left. On the surface it sounded plausible, but beneath it the logic unraveled. If he truly wanted to visit his mother, why didn't he call first? Why use an unregistered burner phone to reach her? That inconsistency led investigators deeper into something harder to fake: finances. They combed through bank records, credit reports, and transaction histories. What they found wasn't just numbers. It was a portrait of a man spiraling toward collapse. Levente was over $100,000 in debt, including credit card balances, student loans, and private borrowing. His bank accounts regularly dipped into the negative. He had no stable employment, and most notably, his only source of income came, strangely enough, from Athena's ex-boyfriend. Every month, Levente received a modest financial transfer labeled as temporary support. It begged the question, why was a grown man in his 30s unemployed and dependent on his mother's former partner? Outwardly, Levente and Athena seemed to share a typical parent-child relationship. But beneath the surface there were cracks no one had seen. A close neighbor of Athena later told police that she had often complained about Levente, describing him as unable to stand on his own, always asking for money, and emotionally volatile when refused. At one point, Athena had cut off all support for several months. Levente, in response, went silent, refusing contact throughout that summer. Athena was a loving mother but also fiercely independent, not easily manipulated, and Levente, living in the shadow of dependence, might have seen a future without her as the end of everything, a future where he would be forced to survive on his own, a terrifying prospect he was never prepared for. To detectives, the pieces began to align: an unannounced visit, a burner phone, a mother cutting financial support, and an overwhelming debt with no escape. The motive, once blurry, now came into focus: money. But more than that, it was pressure. The slow-burning desperation of a man losing control of his life and blaming the one person who had once held it all together. Athena never imagined that her strength would become a reason to be removed. But to Levente, his mother's death wasn't just a crime. It was a calculation, a cold act meant to wipe away his past and steal what little future remained. Levente Lazar's silence in the interrogation room no longer reflected shock or grief. It was the silence of someone realizing every layer of his deception was being peeled away. But the detectives weren't finished. They had one final card to play: undeniable evidence pulled from his own device. A forgotten iPad mini found in the glove compartment of Levente's Jeep had been sent for forensic analysis. When connected to public Wi-Fi, it retained browsing history, and from that, a chilling detail surfaced. In the early morning hours of October 25th, just hours after Athena's confirmed time of death, Levente's iPad connected to a McDonald's Wi-Fi network off a highway in Arizona. While there, it recorded a search: Levente Lazar murder, Grover Beach. Not news. Grover Beach. Not my mother was killed, but his full name directly paired with the word murder. As if he was trying to gauge how much had leaked, whether his name had surfaced, whether he was already in the spotlight. No innocent person searches their own name alongside the word murder right after their mother is found dead. This wasn't speculation. It was evidence of fear of damage control. A classic move by someone trying to predict the media storm coming their way. But this wasn't the only nail in the coffin. Athena Valentini, ever cautious and fiercely independent, had secretly installed a small security camera tucked behind a row of books in her living room. No one in the neighborhood knew about it. No one, including Levente, ever noticed its quiet, watchful lens. But on the night of October 24th, that camera was very much alive. The footage retrieved and reviewed by investigators was silent, but painfully clear. At 8:47 p.m., Levente was seen entering the apartment. No forced entry, no broken lock. Just a smooth motion like someone returning to a place they had been many times before. In his hand was a long object wrapped in a coat. 15 minutes later, the same camera captured him leaving. His face was expressionless. The Beagle followed calmly at his side. Behind them on the floor, a faint dark stain began to spread, just visible under the low light of a table lamp. It was blood. When this footage was played for Levente, he said nothing. No objections, no excuses, just silence, heavy, unyielding, absolute. The detectives didn't need anything more. It was over. Levente Lazar was formally charged with first-degree murder, willful, calculated, and driven by financial gain. That was the turning point. No more theories, no more doubt. From a man who once denied ever leaving Indiana, Levente had become the very center of a cold-blooded crime, and every scrap of data, every pixel of footage pointed directly at him. After Levente Lazar was formally charged, he was transferred to holding, where investigators resumed questioning, but this time with a new approach. No pressure, no traps. They let him spiral on his own. Levente tried to maintain a calm tone. "I didn't kill my mother," he repeated over and over like a mantra meant to fend off reality. When asked about the burner phone, he hesitated for the first time, then nodded slightly. "I bought one for personal reasons." Pressed for clarification, he gave no logical answer. "I didn't want people bothering me," he mumbled. But who needs an unregistered burner phone to avoid distractions on a trip to visit mom? The excuse didn't hold. It wasn't logical. It was evasive. Levente continued to deny seeing his mother that night. "Yes, I went through Grover Beach," he admitted. "But I just drove by. I never stopped. I didn't go in. I didn't see her." But the truth left no room for lies. GPS data from his Jeep showed he parked outside Athena's home for over 40 minutes. Security cameras captured someone entering and leaving the apartment. The burner phone connected to a local cell tower during the exact time frame of the murder. Everything contradicted him. There was no gap to hide in, and Levente knew it. His defense slowly began to collapse, and in the silence that followed, something deeper began to emerge. This wasn't just the story of a murder. It was the unraveling of a fractured psyche, someone caught in a spiral of resentment, pressure, and dependence. Levente had once been the beloved son of Athena, but over the years he had become a jobless man buried in debt, clinging to financial support from his mother's ex-boyfriend. To him, Athena was no longer a sanctuary. She had become a symbol of failure, a towering presence he could never rise above. Simmering jealousy, years of reliance, and the fear of being cut off all fused into something dangerous. When Athena began reducing her support, the last threads of Levente's stability began to snap. Investigators found online activity in his laptop and old phone showing searches related to Will's inheritance laws and how assets are transferred after death. All of it dated within 2 months before the murder. This was premeditation. But beneath that cold logic was a decaying emotional core trapped between deep resentment and desperate entitlement. Levente may not have arrived in Grover Beach with a fully formed plan to kill. But when faced with the strong, independent mother who represented both his failure and his lifeline, he chose the only path he saw to erase the source of the pressure, his own mother. The truth was not just found in data or surveillance. It was revealed in the cracks of his reasoning, the weakness of his denials, and the eyes of a man who knew he had gone too far to turn back. The trial of Levente Lazar began in September 2019 at the San Luis Obispo County Courthouse. The courtroom was modest in size, but the atmosphere inside was dense with tension. Every seat in the gallery was filled mostly by Athena's former colleagues from the California Men's Colony prison, concerned neighbors, and members of the local press. They weren't there just to witness a criminal proceeding. They came seeking justice for a woman who had dedicated her life to serving others. From the very first day, the prosecutor addressed the jury clearly and firmly. This was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated, deliberate act of murder motivated by greed. Levente Lazar was charged with first-degree murder, the most serious criminal charge under California law. If convicted, the sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Over more than a week of testimony, witness after witness took the stand. A Best Buy employee identified Levente as the man who purchased the burner phone. Surveillance footage was played in open court. A forensic GPS analyst demonstrated that the data from Levente's Jeep matched every stop along his journey from Bloomington to Grover Beach. A digital forensic expert revealed search history from Levente's iPad, including a query of his own name alongside the word murder. Each piece of evidence struck hard against the defense. Levente's attorney attempted to cast doubt, suggesting the data could be misinterpreted or manipulated. But when the hidden camera footage from inside Athena's home was played, showing Levente entering then leaving with the Beagle precisely within the estimated window of time of death, the courtroom fell into a heavy silence. No narration, no commentary. The footage spoke for itself. Levente didn't speak in his defense. He sat quietly, eyes vacant, as if he had already accepted there was nothing left to deny. During closing arguments, his lawyer offered one final plea. My client made mistakes, but he did not intend to kill his mother. But the jury wasn't moved. It took them just 4 hours to reach a unanimous verdict, a time frame that said everything Levente Lazar was found guilty of first-degree murder. When the verdict was read aloud, tears filled the room. Some bowed their heads, others gripped each other's hands tightly, yet many stared at Levente, not with anger, but with a deep and hollow disappointment. A son had murdered his own mother for money for escape from debt, and ultimately he traded it all for a sentence no one could reverse. Justice had been served. But the cost was immense. A shattered family, a mother lost forever, and a son who would carry a far greater sentence than prison time, the lifelong sentence of his own conscience. In October 2019, the San Luis Obispo County Superior Court officially sentenced Levente Lazar to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The harshest sentence under the law, no appeals, no second chances. When the judge read the final verdict, the courtroom fell into a chilling silence as everyone silently absorbed the unthinkable. The man sitting in the defendant's chair had murdered his own mother for money. For those who had known Athena, the sentence wasn't a moment of triumph. It was the final cut in a long and tragic unraveling. A former co-worker of hers broke into tears as she told a reporter, "We never thought Levente could do something like this. Athena loved him with everything she had." Neighbors who once watched Athena walk her Beagle every morning were left with only memories. She always smiled, always greeted everyone. A kind soul who never bothered anyone. A gentle, dedicated woman killed by the very hand she had once held as a child. News of Levente's sentencing quickly spread across California. Media headlines screamed, "Murdered for inheritance, Grover Beach family tragedy, shocks the state." Major networks aired footage from the trial showing Levente sitting motionless in court and photos of Athena in her nursing uniform, her warm smile now a painful contrast to her brutal end. Criminal analysts weighed in on national television. One remarked, "This is one of the clearest examples of a financial motive murder, a case where blood ties are erased by greed and desperation." The Athena Valentini case became the focus of true crime podcasts, investigative shows, and criminal psychology breakdowns. Public reaction split into two camps. One side condemned Levente, harshly calling him inhuman, a son who betrayed his own blood. The other didn't defend him, but searched for reasons. People like Levente don't just snap. He's a symptom of failure of family, of society, of everything that was supposed to protect him. But no explanation could undo what had happened. Athena was gone. A mother who had carried her son through every hardship was now just a memory. And Levente, the man who had once been loved without condition, was left to face the rest of his life behind bars. No hope, no redemption. The trial ended. The crowd slowly filed out into the fading October light. Some walked away quietly. Others paused on the courthouse steps, unwilling to let go of the weight they carried. What remained wasn't relief. It was the lingering cold of a truth too close to forget. A life sentence may have closed the legal case, but it could never erase the fact that evil had come from the one place no one expected home. After Levente Lazar's sentence was handed down, no one came forward to claim Athena Valentini's body. There were no next of kin, no clear will, and her only son, the one who once called her mother, was the very person who had ended her life. In such cases, the county was forced to make the final call. Her body was cremated by court order, without a funeral, without anyone to see her off. No flowers, no framed portrait by a casket, no eulogy to recount the life of a nurse who had served with quiet dignity for more than 3 decades. Athena left this world the same way she had lived quietly, without ceremony. But unlike her peaceful mornings, once filled with the sound of her beagle's bark, this goodbye was final, soundless, invisible. News of the lack of a funeral spread quickly through Grover Beach, leaving the community stunned. A group of Athena's former co-workers had planned a memorial service, but upon learning that her remains had already been cremated and taken away without notice, all they could do was place a bouquet of white lilies in front of the prison facility where she had worked nearly her entire adult life. There they stood in silence. No words could soothe the injustice of it all. Athena had lived a hard-working, scandal-free life, never complaining, never demanding, and now she was gone without a single tear shed by family, only the quiet sorrow of those who had merely passed through her life. The family, if it had ever truly existed, was gone. The Valentini name faded, no lineage, no legacy, all of it severed in a single act, not just with a knife to Athena's body, but with a blow to the sacred bond between a mother and her child. Investigators made efforts to locate Athena's Beagle, the one companion she had in her final days. But every lead went cold. No one had seen the dog since the night of the murder. No cameras recorded where it had gone. No vet clinics or shelters reported taking in a Beagle that matched its description. In internal reports, the dog's file was marked missing, cause unknown. But for those who knew Athena, the Beagle wasn't just a pet. It was the last echo of her loyalty, her memory, her unconditional love. Something Levente had never understood. And so in a case that once gripped all of California, the Beagle's name was never spoken again. It vanished like a ghost, just like the part of Athena that lingered in the world. A question with no answer, a symbol of grief left unburied. The death of Athena Valentini did not end in ceremony. It ended in silence with an unclaimed urn and a loyal dog that never found its way home. The case of Athena Valentini didn't end with a gunshot, a dramatic trial, or a shocking verdict. It ended in silence, in an unclaimed urn, in the absence of a dog, and in lingering questions, whispered by those who once knew her, lived beside her, or worked alongside her in the prison, where she had dedicated over 30 years of her life. Athena was an immigrant. She came to America with nothing but hope for a stable, honest life, the kind this country once promised. She worked hard, never asked for recognition, never wanted anyone to worry about her, a woman her community trusted, a model employee admired by her peers. And yet, after all she gave, she died alone in her own home, at the hands of the very person she had raised, nurtured, and given everything to Levente Lazar. Her only son ended his mother's life over something as cold and calculated as money. From start to finish, this case didn't follow the tropes of a movie script. There was no mysterious intruder, no elaborate conspiracy, just a mother and a son, two ends of a bond we've been taught to believe is sacred and unbreakable. But that belief blinded everyone to the signs. Silent distance. Quiet dependency. Expectations turned bitter and resentment buried beneath years of disappointment. All of it unfolded behind closed doors. No arguments, no cries for help. And by the time the truth came out, it was too late to stop the inevitable. The case of Athena Valentini is a chilling reminder of how disconnected modern families can become. We can send messages across continents, but we struggle to have a real conversation at the dinner table. We track each other online, but fail to notice when someone in our own home is unraveling. Convenience and technology cannot replace connection, and when that thread snaps, disaster can follow. Beyond family, this case exposed the darkness of financial pressure, a silent beast that swallows integrity, compassion, and reason. Levente didn't kill out of hatred. He killed because he felt trapped. In a society where a person's worth is measured by income, independence, and credit scores, someone who's failing can easily lose their sense of humanity, just trying to regain control. But no matter how it's framed, a crime is still a crime. And in this case, the killer wasn't a monster in the shadows. He was an ordinary man with pain, pressure, and choices that led him to the edge. Athena didn't deserve to die like this, but her death forced thousands to reflect on their own lives. How many children live far from their parents, yet think they understand them? How many parents stretch themselves thin to support their kids? Unaware they may be fueling a dangerous dependency. There are no simple answers. But this case forced us to start asking the questions painfully, but necessarily. In the end, if there's one label that fits the tragedy of Athena Valentini, it's not just a homicide. It's a betrayed American dream where an immigrant woman who believed in fairness, hard work, and family was failed by all three. Her ashes now rest in an unmarked container. But her story lives on as a scar that refuses to fade, and as a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying darkness isn't what lurks outside, but what quietly grows inside our homes.